Hey, welcome to Tuesday Coffee Break with me, Michael Coffey, and thank you for joining us for week 3 of this 4-week series, and it's called The 4 Elements of Building Firm Trust as a Leader. And FIRM is an acronym, so we have forming trust, increasing trust, restoring trust, and finally we have multiplying trust. And today our topic is restoring trust. And so trust is fragile, and it's broken, and it will be broken at times. So as leaders, we have to get comfortable with this idea that trust will need to be restored. I spent the first 5 or 6 years of my consulting, training, and coaching career working with teams and individuals where trust was significantly damaged within the organization. And my role was to really go in and help bring about a restoration of that trust. And 2 things became really evident to me in this experience that I had over these 5 or 6 years. One thing is trust is incredibly fragile, as I already stated earlier. And the second thing is that it's incredibly difficult to restore once it's broken, especially if it's been broken for quite some time. So restoration then is really only possible when people are really willing to restore and take responsibility for their part of it. That means both for the offender and the offended. It takes both the offender and the offended to really restore trust. One team that I was brought in to work with was a team of about a dozen people and a supervisor. And when I was brought into this team, one of the stories I heard early on was that a couple of the team members, the trust was so bad that a couple of the team members were found going through each other's trash to see if a note had been written about the other person, and they're trying to find evidence on each other, and that's how incredibly bad the trust was. Never had experienced that before, and I have never experienced that since, but that was the level where this team was. And the only thing they really had in common is that they all wanted their supervisor fired. See, the distrust was rampant across the whole group, and they were all aligned around blaming it on the supervisor. Now, as I set the stage there's a quote in a book called Understanding Leadership by the author Tom Marshall, and he says this: trust is fragile, and once it's broken, it's very difficult to restore, and it always takes time to restore. So I began to work with this team, and I was on a 6-month contract with them. And the work was designed, and it was a combination of group sessions, individual coaching, facilitation, assessment work, where we would have these very difficult conversations trying to work through all of the issues and all of the places where trust was broken and it needed to be restored. And I have to hand it to the leaders of this organization, because they really trusted me with this work, even though we weren't sure what the outcomes were going to be. So we got to work, and we began to work, and we began to hash through all of this. Now, I have a question for you. Whether you're the offender or the offended, where are some places where you might need to restore trust? Where in your life or in your team is trust broken, and either, again, you're the offender or the offended, and restoration is needed? I want you to think about the circumstances surrounding that broken trust and really get the story in your mind. And I want to share with you some questions that I used with the clients I mentioned earlier, as well as other clients as we tried to restore trust. The first questions will be a set of self-assessment questions, things for you to think about, whether you're the offender or the offended, but I would like you to think about this. So question number 1, what's happening inside of you around this broken trust? What are you feeling and thinking? What emotions does it bring up for you? The next question is, how are your thoughts either creating an opportunity for trust or further destroying an opportunity for trust? The next question is, what's your intent? What outcome do you really want here? Do you want to restore trust? If you do, then really lock in on what outcome do you want? What would restored trust with this individual or team look like? And then the next question for self-assessment is, what behaviors will you need to change in order to restore the trust? Now we're going to shift a little bit, and I'd like you to think about the other person or the other people in this circumstance that you're thinking about. First question I'd like you to think about and answer in regard to the other people here is, what might be happening inside of them? How might they be thinking and feeling? What are their emotions doing with them around this topic? What will you have to empathize with if you want to restore trust? And then finally, I want you to consider, what do you have to accept about this person or these people or this circumstance in order to restore trust? See, it's my hope that these questions will be helpful as you take responsibility for restoring trust, whether you're the offender or the offended. Well, let me get back to this team. So the first 6-month engagement turned into an additional 6-month engagement. So for nearly a year, I worked with this team trying to restore this severely broken trust. And things began to get better. People began to take responsibility for their part of it, and restoration began, and the team started to operate in a way that was really effective. After months of not being around the organization, after the second engagement was done, I get a call from the supervisor, and I must admit, when he called me, I thought, oh no, what happened? And he then goes on to tell me a story about how he was overhearing his team outside of his office door, and someone on the team was really trying to stir things up, and it would have broken trust. It would have broken the trust that had been reestablished. And he was so pleased to share with me that the other team members who were listening stopped the person in their tracks and said simply, "This is not who we are anymore." A couple of weeks later, I went and visited the organization, and the general manager asked me to step into his office. And again, I thought, oh no, what happened? And he went on to tell me a story about how at a company-sponsored birthday celebration, he witnessed these people who couldn't stand being around each other, who were digging through each other's trash only a year earlier, were sitting together, celebrating and enjoying themselves. The third situation occurred months later. That supervisor, who they all wanted to fire, ended up taking a promotion at another organization. And they hired in another supervisor from outside. And that person called me, and I thought, oh no, what happened? And she went on to tell me how, as an experienced supervisor, this is one of the healthiest teams she had ever worked with in her whole career. And I was so pleased to realize that trust can be restored if you're willing. So are you willing to restore trust where it needs to be restored in your life and in your leadership? If this is helpful to you, or if you think it would be helpful to someone else, we would love for you to share the video. And of course, if you have thoughts or comments that you'd like to share them with us. We'd love to hear your story as well. The next coffee break that we have together, we're going to talk about the last letter in firm trust, which is multiplying trust. Until next time, I'm Michael Coffey. This is Coffee Break. We are Cultivate Group. You're fantastic. Be well, lead well, and do well.